'86 was a fantastic show. In the time before its release, those who have read the light novel always said that if one of the worst anime studios out there adapts it properly, it's going to be great. At that time, I couldn't really get what they meant by that. But now that I have watched it, I can tell this with certainty. If the story continues the way it did, it will be one of the best in military genre. If A1 Pictures isn't too busy creating SAO. But something that I don't see to be mentioned that much is one of the reasons that season 2 was very interesting to me. President Ernst. I don't know what is going to happen in the light novels, but I really hope he is going to be an important character in later seasons. But before explaining why I think he deserves to be even more important than second season, I should explain why I think his character is kind of weird for the role he is in. When I look back at some of the best ruler characters in anime, for example, the Lion King, I meant the real Lion King, that's better, and the Genius Kaiser, I often see a pattern, not that much visible, but still noticeable in this type of characters. See, if someone wants to control a nation, they often can't be a very good person. It's almost impossible. Because being a very righteous person, an idealist, means that you are not willing to break those ideals no matter what. That's why even though we know Reinhardt in ideologies has good inside him and he obviously hates the tyranny of the present dynasty, he's still doing what he does for himself. And his goals for ruling over the whole universe is a wish he wants to fulfill for himself. And on the other hand, even though Saber is an idealist in essence and a very righteous person, she sometimes does some of the worst things a king could do. Basically, she not only sacrificed others for her country, friend and foe alike, but most of all, she sacrificed her own pride and honor, her own ideals, and the kind-hearted and pure girl named Artoria. And if we want to look at the way that most rulers in anime did their things, we have either the selfish parameter and the selfless parameter. And many of these rulers contain mixed amount of selflessness and selfishness. A more well-known example being Lelouch, the protagonist of Code Geass, who is selfish yet selfless at the same time. And he sacrificed so many things for his goals, just like a real ruler does. And that's why I say often when you have a ruler in your story, they are either selfless as fuck or selfish as fuck, or they have mixed amount of selflessness and selfishness, which means their ideals and their personal opinions are often considered worthless because the top priority is either the nation or their own wishes. And Ernst is the exact opposite of these two kinds of selfish and selfless people. And you could even argue his ideals might get the nation destroyed. But that's the point. Unlike the usual I'm willing to sacrifice anything for my country and I don't give a shit about country type of characters, you now have a person who is willing to destroy the whole nation and arguably even the whole humanity if they can't or don't want to do what he thinks is the ideal way of doing things. And that's a very strange position for a very strange man, because these type of people are not usually meant to become rulers, considering that Ernst's ideals are not flexible at all. And not just in fictional stories, but in the history itself, you more see the selfish and selfless and mixed kind of people being the rulers, i.e. those who will probably do anything for either their own safety or their own country, rather than a person who cares about righteousness much more than humanity as a whole. Which I refer to people like Ernst as the or everything or nothing type of people. The kind of person who believes that if he can't have what he wants, in Ernst's case his ideal nation, so he doesn't want it at all. And I know that I'm repeating it for the 10th time, but it's not the type of character that you usually see in such a position. And the combination of an idealist and a ruler makes a very unique character that I think really deserves to be one of the most important characters in '86. In the first scene that we see Ernst, we can sense his confidence when he easily and without hesitation takes off that suit and introduces himself to both the characters and the viewers. Remember the first thing he says to Shin.
気がついたね。こんにちは。まずは君の名前を教えてくれるかな。ようこそギアデ連邦へ。
And that's obviously a very weird act from a governor. Even generals don't do such a thing for their soldiers. And Ernst is greeting a stranger. When others say they should just kill the strangers,
まとめて処分してしまった方が連邦にとっては安全ですが。
he just sighs. And the next scene, he's cheerful as ever and is telling them that they can no longer live in his nation. And it really shows that what he values isn't his nation but human life as a whole. Which means at the same time that humanity in general is the most important thing for him, it is also the thing that he is willing to destroy for his ideals. When his expression changes from the cheerful father type to the cold-hearted idealist, it shows the fact that he doesn't care what is good for the majority, but what is good for his own moral values, which is the exact reason he is unwilling to let the spearhead squad go to war again, because in his eyes it doesn't matter how strong they are. What matters is that they are children and suffered enough. The only reason he accepts the request for going into war is that they wanted it themselves, and it shows that he values what other people want even more than what he wants. He doesn't want to insult others' individuality. I can just sit here and talk about how much he's a good person, but I think you get what I mean. And exactly because he's so righteous and good, he's terrifying. When we first see Ernst's behavior and his speeches, we tell ourselves, it's too good to be true. And that's right. A righteousness that benefits everyone and has no risk in it. An ideal nation. An ideal ruler. A utopia. Is too good to be true. Ernst is the ally of humanity, but at the same time he is humanity's most important enemy. Unlike legions, which until now are shown to be powerful in terms of military strength, Ernst is powerful because of his position, and dangerous because of his ideals.
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Wrong, incorrect, erroneous, mistaken. I can't think of any more words off the top of my head.
And with power comes desires. I have already talked about Ernst and him being willing to destroy his own nation if the nation betrays its own foundations, but I think I need to explain that why it is even more terrifying than what it sounds like. In most of these stories, what's in stake is the lives of main characters, and it was like that even in the first season of 86. But now when a spearhead squad is assigned for the impossible mission, it's more about the whole nation being in danger.
そう。必ず帰っておいで。でないと僕はこの世界を滅ぼしてしまうよ。
It's obvious that he isn't bluffing. From a story standpoint, when we know that Ernst is going to destroy the nation if our main characters die, we have a sense of certitude and confidence, because we can be sure that when the story is still unfinished and Ernst destroys everything if the main characters die, then the main characters won't die, no matter how hard the situation gets. But from a real life standpoint, everything that happens in the show is almost the complete opposite of what usually happens. Because this time what's worthless and at stake in the risk of being destroyed isn't people's lives but the opposite. It's the nation that is in stake for the main characters' lives, and basically the nation is a hostage in the situation for guaranteeing those kids' survival. Unlike the normal situations here, and if you just look at it in a bright and realistic way, you understand that the whole ideal utopia is grounded on a very tiny fragment of metal that might get crushed any moment. And that's not the only reason for Ernst's ideals being terrifying, but the fact that he's obviously willing to do such things over and over and over for his own ideals, for his own pure utopia to don't get tainted, makes everything even more terrifying. Because if you ask me, it's not going to be the only time that Ernst threatens many people's lives and a government to get what he wants. Because in his point of view, if they can't live a pure life without sacrificing innocence, then how he can call his nation utopia? Because in his eyes, his utopia must not be grounded on other people's corpses. He obviously understands that in war, there is casualty and there are people who fail to leave the battlefield alive, but their destiny isn't certain. It's a war, but people still have the chance of survival. If a soldier gets shot in the battlefield and dies, it means he failed to survive. And it's a tragedy because he failed to get to the possible salvation and survival. And they are going to mourn this failure. But when they are sending people to a suicide mission, it doesn't matter how many times utilitarian generals come and tell him that this is necessary and for the nation's sake, because what he sees is a massacre that is going to make his beautiful utopia dirty, not a war where everyone have the chance to survive. So he's willing to destroy this nation because if it betrays its own foundations, i.e. his ideals, then it's better off destroyed.
それは彼らがまだ戦場しか知らないからだ。行いには報いがあるべきで、戦い抜いたなら彼らには平穏が与えられてしかるべきだ。彼らの祖国がそうでないのならなおさら。せめて連邦は正しくありたい。それが人の理想というものなのだから。